Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me live this evening. I'm really excited for this session. We're going to wait a couple of minutes while people join both on Zoom and live via LinkedIn. But to start with, I would love to say hi to those who are joining, and maybe you could drop me a note and say where you're joining from, what country or city you're in, what you do. I'd love to just get a feel for who is co-creating this session with me today. And I think it is going to really be a beautiful co-creation. So please don't be shy, pop in the chat. I can see a few familiar names, but new faces because I'm so often engaging with you via LinkedIn. It's 8 p.m. in Singapore right now. I think it's 8 a.m. in New York, 1 p.m. in the UK, and 10 p.m. in Australia. So different times for all of us all around the world. Hi, Matthew. So nice to see you. Put a face to the name. It's been a very rainy day here in Singapore, which is unusual after we've been having a little bit of a heat wave. So I've been snuggled up inside and really looking forward to this conversation. We might wait just one more minute for a few people to join via both platforms, and then we're going to get into talking about the concept of human intelligence and healing for social change. And I hope that if there's something that you have an opinion on or a question about or some wisdom to share, that you will co-create this session with me and share it in the chat. And my beautiful team members who are joining today are going to actually help us to run the session. We have Marianne, who is Singaporean, but now based in Australia. She's studying to be a doctor of chiropractic. We have the wonderful Viv, who is based here in Singapore. She's my right-hand woman on the ground, and she's also an incredible psychotherapist, seeing clients through Illuma. And we also have, for the first time tonight, Mary joining, who's based in the Philippines and starting to support us with our really interesting, windy journey of creating education and content to support this big mission of social change. So I'm really grateful to have them supporting all of us on tonight's session. Don't be shy. Let me know where you're joining from. I'd really love to know. Thank you, Matthew, for being brave. Why don't we get started? And I hope that you'll start to feel safer and more ready to engage with me as the hour goes on. Hi, Ellie from Belgium. Subin, hello to you from Singapore. Haven't seen you in a little while. From Delhi, New Delhi. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone, for starting to chime in. So we've already got a really lovely global connection here, which is so wonderful. Cincinnati, hello. Malaysia. I'm really realizing that this trauma work and this healing for social change is such a global and intersectional thing. And it's been continuing to warm my heart to connect with people all around the world who are really interested in this topic of committing to our own healing so that we can step up and co-create a much kinder and inclusive world. So with that, let's get started for tonight's session. Welcome. It's no secret that I believe that the social change that we all really crave begins with our own healing work. I think that so many of our attempts to create external change just don't integrate, or they backfire, or they create some byproduct of dysfunction and we don't quite know what's gone wrong. And I believe that in order to really break the cycle and co-create cultures, communities, systems, and organizations that champion well-being, inclusion, collaboration, and sustainability, we need to do things differently. We need to heal. I think it's important that we remember that we are the system. So what we create is a direct result of who we are, our level of empowerment or disempowerment, and our level of consciousness or unconsciousness. And because so many of us are walking around with unhealed trauma, we tend to relate and create from it. And when we create from a baseline of threat and exclusion, it will taint or color whatever it is that we're building, even if we've got good intentions. I think it's important to understand that good intentions do not always equal good outcomes, especially when trauma is at play. If you're joining tonight's session it's highly likely that you've got incredible intentions and that you're already on the journey of healing and illumination and want to further unlock your innate human intelligence and help co-create a kinder world. And I'm really glad that you've chosen to be here with me this evening. In today's session, we're going to explore the concept of human intelligence. You might have heard me using it a lot. We're also going to look at how trauma decontextualizes inside us and leaks into relationships, communities, and cultures. And we'll also explore 4 healing areas for exploration on the journey towards social change. I'm going to pause regularly for questions, and I also welcome your wisdom, your counterpoint, your complete disagreement. I think that it's holding space for diverse and different views. That is how we embody what inclusive culture is all about. So please do put your comments or questions in the chat, and Marianne will be collating them on Zoom and Viv will be collating them on LinkedIn. And I would like to engage with as many as possible. And if we don't get to all of them, I will make some time to actually respond to them in writing and make them available in the next week or so. So what is human intelligence? What does it actually mean? Let me tell you what I think it means. Human intelligence is about understanding the way humans develop, evolve, communicate or relate, respond, react, and survive. There's a lot of information out there on EQ, emotional intelligence, but human intelligence considers more than emotions and empathy. It also includes neuroscience, attachment theory, somatic spirituality, and existentialism. Human intelligence is a holistic exploration of understanding the complex experience of being human and harnessing it with the intention of social change. So rather than a fixed or finite framework, it's a complex kaleidoscope that continues to change and includes multidimensional context, as well as factors of time, environment, and world influences. So it's not simple, it's complex, but I think that we can simplify it. In order to tap into our human intelligence, we need to learn about how humans tick. And in order to really do that, we need to first empty out all of our own experiences of threat and fear and exclusion and shame and powerlessness. We need to heal our trauma. As we heal, we see far more clearly, and we can actually learn that humans, although complex, also operate with pretty clear organizing principles. The most important human truth is that we are relational. And when we learn to harness the power of our relationships for healing, healing is inevitable. And so this is what all of my work is about: attunement, listening to all of the layers and all of the languages in which we speak, which are mostly nonverbal, responding to them and showing up with peaceful and intelligent presence to ignite incredible social change. It's through many years of study and healing and exploring and learning that I unlocked my innate human intelligence. And I really watched my world just morph and shift around me. Some of you may be aware of parts of my story, but I was very, very sick, both mentally and physically, for a really long time. I was trapped in the medical system for 17 years and told, if this strange illness doesn't kill you, the medication will, and you're a hopeless case. And I was really trapped. But once I really tapped into these philosophies of human intelligence, I managed to heal, and I managed to extricate myself from all of the dynamics and systems that were perpetuating my trauma to continue to spiral and become harder and harder to spot, more and more diffuse. So it's been a very personal and professional journey for me. And over time, I unlocked my innate human intelligence and I turned it into a framework for inquiry and healing. And I teach it to others in various contexts around the world. And I really believe that this is the remedy, that unlocking human intelligence and the relational lessons that allow us to respond and become the humans that heal rather than harm can create incredible social change. But we need to start right here. So that's what I think human intelligence is. I'm going to pause, Marianne, and ask if there have been any questions so far.
Not at the moment, Natalia.
All right, we'll keep them coming. Stay curious, connect with me. That's what we're here for. So human intelligence is basically the angle that I believe we need to take to really create social change. We've got to do much deeper, much more complex learning. And so when I bring human intelligence towards leadership, it's actually exploring different areas of learning about human experience and human dynamics so that we can approach ways of co-creating different cultures and communities and systems and organizations that feel both supportive and freeing, that really champion our sovereignty and our collaboration. And I think it is a journey and it is a complex one, but I think with my work, I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. So there are some pillars of this healing journey that I want to explore with you. The first is becoming trauma-informed. What does it mean to be trauma-informed? There are many trauma-informed teachers beginning to teach frameworks all around the world because more and more of us are really realizing, hey, this is a really traumatized world and there's a lot of dysfunction and trauma is at the root. So there's not yet a defined definition for being trauma-informed. Let's start with understanding what trauma is. Trauma is when a past experience of threat that's over is living and breathing in us now. It can affect us mentally, emotionally, physiologically, and relationally or socially. It's largely unconscious, non-verbal, and it's felt. It's somatic in nature, and it speaks through the whispers of the body, through our emotions, and through our relating patterns. And it travels through relationships, communities, and cultures. So it continues to spread and decontextualize and become more diffuse and difficult to spot. And we end up just labeling it as, well, that's how we are. This is part of our personality. This is part of our culture. This is part of our community. This is part of our system. And I think acceptance is a really dangerous thing. And what I want to inspire us towards is to not accept things just as they are and not make the best within a traumatized framework, but to go to these roots and unearth everything. It's also really important to understand that trauma is not the past event that happened to us. It's how it's left unmetabolized inside us and goes on to change the way we perceive, relate, and express. So one person may experience a traumatic event and actually end up having very severe trauma, whereas another person may go through that same event or a similar event, and because they have the resources and the capacity to metabolize it, they don't end up with these changes that are in fact the trauma. And our ability to go through and process and metabolize these experiences depends on a number of factors. Some of them include our physical and mental health baseline at the time of and after the trauma, also our environment and our level of safety and nourishment at the time of and after the trauma, and the quality of our relationships at the time of and after the trauma. And in fact, it's the relational piece that is the biggest indicator as to whether we will go through something really difficult and come out with this incredibly unresolved trauma, or whether we'll be able to process it. And so when we are in supportive relationship, when we're not alone with these traumatic experiences, when there's safe space and we have the ability to share what we're feeling, to ask for help and to be cared for, we're less likely to hold the same level of unresolved trauma. So relationship is the remedy. So that's what I believe trauma is. I can see there's a few questions, so I'm just going to pause before we go on to talk about what it means to be trauma-informed. From Matthew, is it an open framework or closed, rigid? So is it flexible? I believe it needs to be flexible. A relational approach to everything is the most important thing. We get very stuck with rolling out frameworks and modalities and protocols. And when we do that, we actually stop responding to what's going on in the present. And the way trauma shows up and the way relationship dynamics form and the way communities form are very different all of the time. They're unique. So what I like to offer are philosophies that actually can be used as required and can be, I guess, delivered through the human that is there to support the healing. So I think we're all incredibly different. We've all got different strengths and gifts and capabilities. And if we learn these philosophies of human intelligence and these relational approaches to support healing and social change, we'll stay evolutionary in what we're offering. And I think that this is the most important piece. There's no 12-step guide to create social change. Otherwise, we would have done it a long time ago. Humanity would look very different. Thanks for that question. Does that answer? I can see you nodding. Thank you. From Catherine, does a healer need to be trauma-free himself or herself in order to help others, or at least aware of their very own trauma and dealing with it first? Great question. I don't believe in a healed state. So I'm trauma-informed and I'm helping others every day. I still hold unresolved trauma and I'm still working on it every day. And I believe I will always be healing. And it's actually me being honest and authentic about that keeps me human and stops me going into the very interesting polarized things, the polarized levels that we have in terms of who's the teacher and who's the student. Actually, we're all in this together. So I believe we can always start helping people and learning to support healing from trauma all of the time. And what's most important is increasing our knowledge and increasing our capacity. So what we may be able to offer on one day may be very different to what we're able to offer on another day, because life is messy and complicated. And when we come back to the concept of capacity building and honoring our boundaries and capacity, we can choose to show up to support with the capacity that we have on any given day. I do believe if we have unresolved trauma and it has a relational manifestation, so we get triggered, maybe we shut down or we stonewall or we have emotional outbursts at people or we project narratives onto people and don't let them be who they are, then it's really hard to show up as a human that heals, because then our trauma is continuing to leak into dynamics. And to me, this is the biggest reason for so much of our pain in the world. It's the reason for disrespect. It's the reason for violence. It's the reason for war, is that we are not able to contain our trauma and heal it. So I hope that answers, and let me know if there's a follow-up question. I can see so many questions coming in. I'm going to pause and continue to speak a little, but Marianne and Viv are collating them, and I'll take a couple more in a minute, but please don't stop putting them in. It's wonderful to see so much engagement. It's such an important topic, and we could probably talk for 20,000 hours about it. Well, I could anyway. So let's talk about what it means to be trauma-informed. Again, there are many teachers emerging in this field, and probably a lot of them have different definitions. And again, rather than give a definition, I would love to offer some areas to explore that can help us understand the nature of trauma. So the first is to understand the experience of safety versus threat. When we are living in a state of trauma, or when we are triggered into a state of trauma, again and again, we're actually experiencing everything from a baseline of threat. We don't feel safe, and we may not even have access to safety in the present, in our nervous system, in dynamic, in the world. And so understanding whether we or someone else are experiencing through the lens of safety or threat is a really important point of departure for beginning to be trauma-informed. And we can begin with a very simple inquiry when we're feeling anxious or worried or triggered or unsure. We can ask ourselves, am I feeling a sense of safety and threat? And the next question we can ask is this threat needed right now? Is it relevant in this present moment? And sometimes the answer is yes, but very often the answer is no. And that is a trauma response. We're perceiving threat where there is none. And sometimes just that little conscious inquiry causes us to switch on our rational brain and begin to de-escalate out of that threat response. Being able to offer that inquiry to someone else can do the same. So if we're dealing with someone that's clearly not rational and very stressed and in a threat state, simply offering that question can actually be a really great key to helping them de-escalate. And once our rational brain switches on, we're more available to do what we need to do to either help ourselves or to help someone else to navigate a difficult situation. So that's one thing. Another thing that's really important when it comes to being trauma informed is understanding that the past is decontextualizing in the present. So someone might be experiencing something from the past in the here and now. And when that's happening, we can't see really clearly. We can't discern what's safe, what's unsafe, what we want, what we don't want, who is for us and who's against us. And so it usually ends up that we end up not seeing things clearly and perhaps making decisions that aren't in our best interest or in service of others. And a really big piece of healing is learning to unlink the past and the present, which is a really complex journey in itself. Another piece of being trauma informed is understanding that trauma is physiological first. It's happening in our bodies. So often when we're trying to access it from our logical left brain, we really can't. And I'm sure we've all had these experiences where we just can't get ourselves out of an anxiety attack or racing thoughts or shaming voices in our mind, or we've been in dynamic with someone who we really just can't get through to. They can't seem to hear us, even though we've got those good intentions. And so to be trauma informed, we have to understand that something in the body is signaling that that person's not safe. And then they're having likely a very complex response or reaction to that. And so learning how to master our nervous systems and to support others to regulate and build resilience in theirs is a really big piece. A couple of other things that are important when it comes to being trauma informed is understanding what triggers are. That triggers are actually these parts of ourselves that have gone through the trauma, that haven't processed our experiences, that are being lifted into the present moment and asking for a space to tell their stories. And unfortunately, many mainstream approaches to dealing with triggers don't allow that safe space for those parts of us to process and tell their stories and integrate. So we tend to quiet each other or to shame each other and stuff it all back down. So it's either like, oh, I don't want to be triggered, I better put that away, or don't you dare trigger me. And this is what creates cultures of hypervigilance. And it's something I'm very, very passionate about beginning to help us change. And the last thing that I want to say on being trauma informed is that it's important to understand the relational and environmental and systemic context of trauma. So trauma often happens within dynamic, and that might be a one-to-one dynamic. It might be within a family, a group, a community, a culture, an organization, within systems. And so when we're talking about healing from trauma, we need to understand the forces that are causing those experiences of essentially threat, oppression, and exclusion. So it really is very, very multidimensional. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about being trauma informed. I can see there's a lot of questions. Marianne, are you able to share a couple, and I'll respond to a few before we continue?
Yes. So Anne was asking, how would you, with their own words, explain this definition of human intelligence from regenerative leadership? Because human intelligence is hopeful knowledge about regenerative human development, and that leads to like post-traumatic. Yeah, I think that's where it stopped.
When we heal, we move into post-traumatic growth. And I believe that the principles of individual healing are the same as the principles of relational healing or community healing or organizational healing. So healing is essentially about coming alive again. And when we talk about regenerative organizational development or culture transformation, it's all about renewal. And that's essentially what healing is. It's allowing the sense of threat to pass and the danger to disperse so that we can come alive again. It is a death and rebirth process. I hope that that answers, and let me know in the chat if there's a follow-up question. Are there any more questions right now, Marianne?
Earlier, you're talking about metabolizing. What does it mean in the context that you're referring to?
When we experience something that is too much for us to process in the moment, so that might be we're in an abusive situation, it might be we're going through a global pandemic, it might be that we're living through a war, we're separated from our loved ones. When we don't have the capacity to process it or metabolize it, that trauma will actually be hidden inside us. So a little bit of the science is that when we don't have capacity to process or metabolize, our right brain will hide any of the content that we simply can't process. And it's stored in the right brain felt recesses of the body. And that's so our left brain, our rational brain, can allow us to continue on and move through and survive and keep going. And so when our experiences are not metabolized, what happens is that they will begin to leak inside us or into the world around us. So over time, they could show up as physical health symptoms or mental health symptoms, or they may show up in our relational dynamics. So we're not made to survive forever, and we're not really made to store these traumas for a very long time, forever. So at some point, we will be asked to heal. Something inside us will say, it's time to metabolize this. And it might come from one of two things. One is an experience of overwhelm or a trigger. So this could be an event that happens in life, or it could be a really big change. So it's really common for hidden trauma, unresolved trauma, to trigger and start leaking out during big life milestones. So it might be during pregnancy and childbirth. It might be with the death of a loved one. It might be moving countries or starting a new job or retiring or a global pandemic. All of these things, because they're a lot, can trigger the trauma that we've so neatly packed away to emerge. And it usually will present as a physical or a mental health crisis, or someone leaving a relationship all of a sudden, a midlife crisis. So that's one way. The other way that it can emerge is actually through the opposite. It's through an increased sense of safety. So the more stable and safe we feel in our lives, the more capacity we have. And when we reach a certain point of capacity, those parts of us that need healing will say, they can cope with it now. I'm going to let loose, and all of the trauma can start to come up. Certainly in my own journey, it's when I've reached certain levels of safety and stability within my life that suppressed memories of really difficult things have shown up, and physical sensations have shown up. And much earlier in my journey, I had no idea what it was or what to do with it. But now I'm pretty good at seeing, there's something for me to process now. So it is a continued journey. I hope that that answers. I'll take one more question now, Marianne, and then I'll continue on because we're already halfway through our time together.
Well, could trauma be completely healed?
I think that's very subjective. I think I said earlier, I do not believe in a healed state. I know I will be healing for eternity, maybe even after I'm gone, who knows? But I do believe we can get to a place where there's so much peace and power around our experiences and a lot of compassion. So if I'm experiencing a symptom of trauma or a memory coming up or a trigger, or I'm having a low day, I'm holding it with total compassion. There's no shaming voice around it. I'm not trying to force myself out. I have my tools, and it does not distract my life, and it does not distract anyone else's life. So this is about containment. So for me, I'm in deep acceptance and compassion that there'll always be healing, but there's no longer dysfunction rocking my world. So to me, that's the marker we need to look for. Have I created a life full of peace and power? And can I sit with myself in compassion, even on the hardest days? Thank you so much. What a beautiful question. I feel that one as I say it. I really, really have reached that point, and it means maybe there's still trauma to heal, but I'm no longer traumatized. And to me, that's the place where I would love us all to be, because we then can enter a state of grace. Let's talk about the nervous system a little bit more. So just as we need to understand trauma and how it decontextualizes through mind, body, relationships, and on all of the ways, we also need to go into some deeper understanding of the nervous system. The nervous system is our governing system of our experience. So it is in charge of how every other physical system in our body is experiencing. It's also in charge of how our mind and our brain are processing and the way we perceive, relate, and express. And it's also in charge of our ability to relate with either peace and respect, or chaos and disrespect. And so because it is this central system inside us, we want to understand it and learn how to master it. When we experience trauma, what happens is that our nervous system in that moment is no longer able to calibrate. So it can't keep us feeling safe in the moment. So we enter survival. And there are 3 different kinds of survival. One is fight or flight, which many of you would have heard of. The second is freeze, which is more of kind of a shutdown, frozen. I don't think I can fight or flight, so I'm going to freeze until the danger passes. And the third is co-activation. And when we're co-activated, we're actually either experiencing both those survival responses at once, or we're ping-ponging between the two. So it's like we just can't find home or ground or stillness. And this one is very, very common in this day and age. It's the reason for us not being able to be consistent in our lives. It's the reason that we might be volatile in relationships. It's the reason why we might not make sense to ourselves. We're having these highs and lows and we're all over the place. And so understanding our own tendency towards one or more of those survival responses is really important, because the tendency we have towards survival will tell us what we need to do to come out of survival. Similarly, if we're working with other individuals or groups, if we understand the nervous systems of those individuals, or the sort of baseline nervous system read, and they will assimilate to each other in a group or community, we can get far more intelligent about how we're going to show up and support people to feel safer. So before any real healing work or change work can occur, we need to be able to feel safe. And so one of the biggest things that we work with nervous system mastery is actually learning to regulate the nervous system and increase a sense of safety. Another piece that we work with is building resilience. So when we get triggered very, very easily, it's because we have very little resilience inside our nervous system. It's like our nervous system is shot. And if we're so, I guess, hypervigilant and sensitive, and we're getting triggered all the time and we can't handle very much, it makes it really difficult for us to enjoy our lives. It also really makes it really difficult for us to show up and relate and co-create within group dynamics. And we are all living and relating and working within group dynamics. And so nervous system mastery is a very, very big piece of our individual and collective healing puzzle. And in module 2 of my human leadership training, we focus just on that. We learn how to listen to the language of the nervous system. We learn how to tone our nervous system, build resilience, and listen to others, and use relational tools to help them not only regulate, but to build resilience. And so it's not a rational thing. It's not mental. It's very physiological, somatic, and felt. Are there any questions right now? Pause, Marianne. Let me know.
Just give me a quick moment because there are a few questions coming in.
I can see lots coming in. Thanks for going through them for me.
Okay, so
It's
for
great.
that, back up again. So naturally, most extreme experiences goes untreated, and it's only about 85%. So 15% have problems with surviving. From what point would you start? It says trauma testament, so I'm not too sure what that meant.
Actually, I don't understand the question. Can you say it again?
Okay, so naturally, most extreme experiences goes untreated for about 85% of people, and 50% would have problems with surviving. So I think he's asking, from what point would you start treating trauma, if I'm interpreting that question correctly?
Okay. I mean, I think context is important and role is important. And so in today's session, we're exploring this as a leadership framework. And so we always want to understand what our role is when we're engaging with someone. And so if we're working within a leadership context and within a corporate organization or a community, we're not there to be a therapist. Not everybody can be a therapist, but we can learn very simple relational strategies to help everybody, no matter the severity of what they're going through. And we're not able to heal everybody. In fact, we can't heal anyone. And I think a really big piece of our work as space holders and leaders and facilitators is to really own that and be clear that we're not here to suck up everybody's pain and make everything better. All that we can do is make sure that we are regulated and that we are working on ourselves, and that with whatever capacity we have and within whatever role we have, we show up with this healing intention. So I don't think it is about the severity. It's about, as a human that wants to heal, what can I offer in this moment that is appropriate? And in the training, we explore quite a lot around boundaries and role and dynamics and balance or imbalance of power, because all of these are really important topics to explore, so that we can find ways that feel sustainable and equitable and don't breach boundaries, and don't also cause us to experience vicarious trauma or burnout. So it's very, very complex. But if I am working with a group, with a team in an organization, if I notice that somebody's trauma is at play, I'm going to help in the way that I can within the role, within the context that is appropriate. I hope that answers. It's a very complex question. Do we have another question, Marianne?
Does being trauma-informed emphasize the importance of understanding how trauma affects our executive functioning?
Absolutely. I think when we are holding unresolved trauma, so much of our energy is going towards survival. And so when our energy is going towards survival, it's going to diminish the amount of energy we have for other things, which executive functioning may be one, empathy and communication and collaboration may be another. So that's a really common thing that I see in the corporate world, is that there's this huge push. You need to learn your soft skills. You can't read the room. Where's the empathy? And actually what's going on is that these high-powered executives have nervous systems that are on fire, and they've got their own trauma that's stopping them from either doing what they need to do or engaging and relating and showing up as the leaders that everybody wants and deserves. I'll take two more now, Marianne.
Do you think that constant extreme trauma for years can lead to major health conditions such as multiple sclerosis?
I mean, I'm a living example of that. So a little bit of my story is I grew up in a very abusive and traumatic environment. And of course, back then it was just normal. Often when we're going through the trauma, we don't know we're going through the trauma, certainly when we're young. When I was 17, I experienced mental health misdiagnosis. I was told I had bipolar and put on a triple cocktail of meds, and it made everything much worse. And then at 24, my trauma showed up in my body. So I was trying to speak. I was asking for healing, but in code. And my illness spanned every system in my body. It was degenerative, or so it seemed. So my nervous system was on fire. There were changes in my brain. My legs stopped working. There were periods I couldn't walk. There were periods where my hands were in braces. I had no power. I had fluid on my lungs. My gut was shutting down. You know, my skin was, there was bleeding in the skin. My red blood cells couldn't hold. The fascia wasn't holding them together. So I was really sick. So 100% trauma can do that. And I spent years and years trying to heal. Because no one really understood this complex nature of trauma, I just kept given more topical applications. So I was on 42 medications at one point. I was having 4 days of intravenous treatment per month. And that period was 7 years, because no one really knew what was going on. And it wasn't until I came back to look through the lens of trauma and come home to my body and process a lot of the origin stories and experiences, as well as exit the harmful systems and dynamics that were perpetuating it, that I healed. And it was what the doctors thought was this sort of miracle recovery, but it wasn't. I just kind of figured out the keys. And that's actually what got me into this line of work. So thank you for that question. Marianne, can I take one more, please? Thank you so much.
So in Denmark, healthcare workers are called high-risk professions, which the writer thinks must be a threat identity and will not lead to post-traumatic growth. So what kind of powerful professional safe identity would instead make us feel safe and self-confident?
What an interesting question. Thank you for that. I think as healthcare workers, we are at risk of re-traumatization or vicarious trauma or burnout. I agree that identifying as that is not helpful for our mindset. Um, I'd have to think about an appropriate name or identity that we can call ourselves. But I guess the most important thing is that we learn that we can work in ways where we look after ourselves and protect ourselves. And I guess that's debatable, isn't it? Because there are many healthcare workers who are put under such extreme conditions and not given the resources they need. So it's a real problem in the healthcare landscape today. It's also a problem for teachers. It's also a problem for social workers. It's also a problem for anybody on the front line of first responders. One of the programs I teach is called Regulation and Resilience, and it's specifically for all of us in those professions where we are on the front line with trauma every single day. But I wonder what it's like if we were to just call ourselves trauma-informed or trauma-aware practitioners, because that's just really honest, isn't it? The most important thing is that we learn to find the boundaries to look after ourselves. Another sort of little personal story is when I started working as a therapist, there was very quickly a line out the door to see me. It was quite crazy. And when I started, I was working 6 days a week with 8 clients a day, all with very severe trauma. And pretty quickly, I realized, wow, this isn't sustainable. I was having to work so hard to regulate myself and to self-care that pretty much every moment that I wasn't working, I was needing to self-care so I could show up and be the best facilitator or therapist for my clients. And I realized, wow, that's not sustainable. And it's a bit of a blessing to be able to work for myself because I can just say, well, this isn't working for me anymore, so I'm going to change my system. And so now I only see clients 2 days a week. And I do, speaking and teaching and writing and all of these other things. And all of the therapists that train with me, and there's quite a few now here in Asia, I always suggest to therapists, don't be a therapist full time, be a therapist part time and do something else, diversify, protect your energy, have another revenue stream. So I think there's so much to unpack on this topic. Okay, I'm going to move on a little now, but I will come back for some more questions in a few minutes. I want to talk about the concept of fragmentation because it's another really important piece for us to understand, not only in our own healing journey, but in our journey to support others to heal. We are all fragmented. We all have different parts of ourselves that have different desires, needs, feelings, emotions, repulsions, and we tend to consider ourselves as a single self. We don't tend to consider ourselves as complex and having multiple dimensions, but we all do. And it's that tendency to be so singular that is actually what causes us to feel like something's not wrong or have inner conflict, or have these opposing thoughts or wishes, and ending up often being really unfulfilled. In the case of trauma, I talk about trauma-born fragmentation. So it's a little bit different. If you consider a child that's going through abuse when they're young, there would be all of these expressions that they would wish to have that perhaps weren't safe to. So perhaps that child wanted to ask for help, but perhaps that child wanted to set a boundary and say no. Perhaps that child wanted to fight back. Perhaps they wanted to run. Perhaps they wanted to lie down on the floor and just have a meltdown. And because it wasn't safe for any of those parts of them to express, what happens is that they actually pack those parts of them away and respond in a way that feels the safest in that moment. And when the trauma remains unresolved, what happens is that child develops a personality that is based on their complex trauma response. And these parts of them are actually locked away inside themselves. And later in life, those parts are the ones that are triggered. Those parts are the ones that are the voices in our heads that are questioning us or wanting different things. And sometimes the parts lie dormant for a very long time, and we're not really sure about them until later in life when they get triggered. And so a lot of our relational dysfunction and a lot of our incongruent behaviors and dynamics actually stem from the parts of us that are really trying to tell their story or get their needs met or reach for their desires. And so for our own healing, beginning to explore all the parts of us that have been suppressed and bringing them into compassionate care and allowing them to become part of our cohesive whole is incredibly life-changing. Similarly, when we're dealing with somebody who seems to be relating with us in really nonsensical or inappropriate ways, or is not able to speak up, or really can't seem to hear us, it's often that a traumatized part of them is kind of at the front of their experience. And as facilitators or leaders, once we learn to identify when that's happening, we can learn to speak to those parts. And I can't tell you how incredibly healing it is to have someone meet you when you've not even yet met yourself. It is perhaps one of the most healing experiences ever. And in module 3 of Human Intelligence Leadership Training, we learn all about fragmentation. We learn how to commune with our own fragmented selves, and we learn relational tools, specifically verbal cues, to be able to speak to the unconscious. So remember, trauma is largely unconscious, and it's actually living inside these parts of us. And so when we can learn to commune with and speak to those parts, we're actually able to find collaboration where perhaps there was none. We're actually able to find relational safety where perhaps there was none. So this is one of my favorite topics. Parts work has been around since the beginning of time. So it really exists through early psychology frameworks. It exists through hypnotherapy, which is where I had my formative training on parts. It exists in many spiritual frameworks as well. Currently, the most popularized form of parts work is IFS, internal family systems. And I know so many people that are delving into this work. And I do believe it is a very important and necessary piece when it comes to healing from trauma and when it comes to facilitating others to be able to be their true selves and relate in healthy ways in the present. I also want to highlight that the two really popularized terms in the corporate world or the self-help world of imposter syndrome and self-sabotage are often linked to fragmentation. And so when we go deeper into this topic, we can actually learn how to heal our imposter syndrome, or at least meet it with a lot more compassion. And we can also learn to not only give our parts what they need, but to set boundaries with them so that they do not lead us towards dysfunction and sabotage. I'm going to move on to talk about one more topic, and then we'll take a couple more questions before we finish up for this evening. The whole point of all of this healing work is so we can create lives not only for ourselves, but for everybody around us, for humanity, where we're experiencing peace and power and collaboration. And so in the last part of my book, Why Am I Like This? Part 6 is called The Laws of Peace and Power. And this is everything that I believe we need to live by to create this state. I think that when we approach relationships, community, culture, and system and policy making with the laws of peace and power as a guiding principle, we can finally begin to create from a place that's not only well-intentioned, but conscious and deeply accountable. And of course, there's still going to be many fires to fight and issues along the way, but the foundation will be set up for peace and power rather than threat and disempowerment. When we are doing culture work or organizational development in an organization or building a company, if we are building it from our own unresolved trauma, the dynamics and the systems and the policies we create will be laced with it. And so I really believe that when we get to a place where we're not holding so much of our own resolve trauma, what we create is going to be incredibly different. And I know that I see that within my little business structure. It's something I'm so committed to within my organization and within the few very forward-thinking organizations I work with. We can't create something different if we're sort of full of our own trauma and creating from it. And so the last module, module 4 of my leadership training, is all about this, the laws of peace and power, and how we can create equitable, inclusive cultures and systems. We explore ecosystem building, we explore policy development. And I really have seen that when we do this after embarking on such a textured healing journey, what we create is very, very, very beautiful. I'm going to share the laws of peace and power with you for those who are interested. These are my laws of peace and power. So 1 is reclaiming sovereignty. 2 is capacity and personal sustainability. 3 is complete accountability. 4 is receptivity. 5 is purity of power, and 6 is reverence. And I love that last one, reverence, when we just place such reverent attention and awareness on everything that we're creating. Only good things can happen, but to do that, we've got to slow down. And so much of what we create in this world is fast, quick fix, unicorn, type stuff. And so I really want to bring us back to this slow, considered, conscious way of living, relating, and creating. So this is the journey of systemic and cultural healing and transformation that I believe we need to embark on. It's not easy, and it calls us to meet our wounds, our shadows, our pain, and transform them. It requires incredible amounts of compassion, commitment, and patience. And it's something that we need to do within safe, conscious communion with peers who share our vision for the future and want to work to co-create it. And so this is the space I seek to hold in all of the workshops and trainings. It's very collaborative. Everyone is different. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next rounds, the next cohort. So I'm going to be running module 1 and 2 in Singapore in early September. And I'm going to be running module 1 for the first time in Austin, Texas. I found the most incredible healing community called Casa de Luz, right by the river. There's a raw food kitchen. As soon as the universe took me there, and I went, oh, I need to teach here. So I'm very excited to see who gathers for the next cohorts. I'm also so excited that in Singapore this year, we're going to be doing the first Train the Trainer cohort. So there are 4 participants who joined last time who have decided they would like to learn to teach this. And to me, this is the most exciting thing of all, where the work is not tied to me anymore. So it's a super huge milestone that I'm very, very excited to see happening. The other thing is that I really hope to teach this in Europe next year. For now, I'm going to be visiting Amsterdam, or near Amsterdam, about an hour away this October, to deliver a 1-day introductory workshop on all of these topics, as well as we're going to be holding a community event. I think there are so many incredible people in Europe, and I hope some of you will come and connect. And Marianne's going to send links to all of those things in the chat. And while she's doing that, we have 7 minutes left, so I'd love to answer a few more questions. I can see that there've been a lot coming through. Marianne, how much of a multitasker are you? Can you share links as well as give me questions?
Yeah, I'm just going to pass you the next question. How is it that so many of us experience trauma, even people that seemingly had a loving and benevolent environment while growing up?
That's a great question. Trauma doesn't only happen within our family dynamic. It can happen within community. It can happen within culture. It can happen through commerce and capitalism, and the voices that come through social media. So it can happen in so many ways. I also think there are many of us who have had loving environments, but also there have been experiences of misattunement and shame that have been passed to us. So trauma is not always so overt as severe abuse and neglect. It can actually happen simply from not being seen and heard. It can happen from having ideals projected upon us and being encouraged away from who we wish to be. So it doesn't have to be this huge thing. Remember, it's not about the past experiences. It's about how they have altered the way we perceive, express, and relate. Thank you. I'll take 3 more questions, Marianne, please.
All right. Does polyvagal theory relate to any of the philosophies you draw from?
Absolutely. So polyvagal theory is something absolutely to explore if you want to be trauma informed. We cover the basics in Module 2, Nervous System Mastery. It's developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, and it essentially explores our nervous system's experience of threat or safety, particularly within social context. So absolutely go and read his full work. In my book, there is an entire chapter on it that kind of puts it into a very simple explanation, and certainly we'll be going deep into not only our physiological nature, but our relational nature. So our nervous systems are both influencing and being influenced all the time. It's a very, very fun and experiential module. I see, Anne, you're saying come to Denmark, come to the Netherlands. That's not so far. I hope to see you there. Okay, Marianne, is there another question?
Yeah. Bart would like to know what he can do so that he can raise his child trauma-free. Is that possible?
Thanks for bringing this into the conversation, Bart. I think it's so hard when we have unresolved trauma as a parent and we have children. Often our children can become triggers, or we can project our past wounds onto them. And it is a journey. So I'll share a little bit of a personal thing. When my two children were babies, I had them very close together. That's when I was in the thick of my trauma. I was very sick. I was 40 kilos. I had broken ribs from osteopenia, and I was in so much physical pain. I was walking around with my hand in a splint and not able to use one leg. And my baby son was really sick, and he would not stop crying, and I hated him in that moment, and I yelled at him. And so that's me licking my trauma, right? And when I was really sick the year before, when my daughter was a baby, I was in hospital like every week having treatments. I was away from her and I couldn't hold her. And so, of course, that went on to affect them. The beautiful thing is that children are very resilient. And so I've seen over the last 10 years actually proactively working with my children to show up as now a woman who can contain her trauma and isn't bringing it into the relationship. My kids are not only over those experiences, but they're two of the most empathetic and authentic and powerful little humans I know. So I think, if we've got kids and we realize we've got trauma, we can just start the healing work now, and we can learn to heal in real time with our kids. And I think it's really possible. And I know that when I look at my children, they are the proof of my healing. So they are the embodiment of what intergenerational healing from trauma is about. And I believe we can all do it. And it's not a perfect journey. Thank you for that question. I'll take one more question, Marianne, please.
All right, I'm just going to combine this. So, what kind of trauma understanding is post-traumatic growth based on, and how do you integrate PTG in your understanding of trauma?
To me, post-traumatic growth is about coming alive again. So when our capacity for aliveness increases, we can experience joy, we can make good decisions, we can be more self-caring and self-compassionate, we can be more empathetic for others, we have better discernment, we can take more risks. And all of these things are often a natural byproduct of healing. So to me, post-traumatic growth is inevitable if we focus on the healing work with a very trauma-informed, relational, and gentle approach. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning into this session. It's been wonderful. I know that there are some questions that I've not been able to answer, so Marianne's going to take them off, and I will take time to write some short little response to them, and we'll find a way to send them out. I really appreciate your time and your energy and your curiosity. And I hope to see some of you in the next live cohorts in Singapore and USA, and also at the events in the Netherlands. I'm so excited that this work is increasing. And I just invite you to continue to engaging with me, whether it's on LinkedIn, Instagram, via my website, or all of the various channels. Thank you so much. And have a beautiful day or evening ahead. Bye.